So good evening. I'm Valerie. I'm the manager of museum learning and administration here at the Wilson Museum, where our mission is to cultivate and encourage human connection across place, time, and cultures. We would like to welcome you all to this evening's program here online. We are in the homeland of the Penobscot Nation and their Wabanaki relations. We encourage those of you who are joining us virtually to learn more about the Indigenous people who call where you live home. Today's program is part of our Connecting to Collections program series and is made possible through the generous support of Bangor Savings Bank. If you are not already a member of the Wilson Museum, there's information on our website about joining and making donations to support the educational work of the Wilson Museum and signing up for our e-newsletter. We are excited to welcome Myles Felch, who is a curator and geologist at the Maine Mineral Gem Museum in Bethel, Maine.
Yeah, greetings everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. We have a pretty good little group here, 20 folks. Wait please till the end of the presentation for any types of questions. And again, I'll repeat, if I begin to get really choppy where I'm at, please just signal some way and I can switch off. I have my phone loaded. I'm ready to go with that end for the audio. So yes, thanks Valerie for the introduction. My name is Myles Felch. I'm a curator at the Maine Mineral Gem Museum that's located over in Bethel, Maine. We're a fairly new organization. We opened in 2019. And if you haven't come to visit, I really recommend making the trip. I assume most of the people tuning in, I could be wrong, are on the eastern side of the coast of Maine, at least MDI type area. But it is a bit of a trip over to Bethel, but I do recommend it if you can. So this lecture that I put together here, Tourmaline Maine State Mineral, was part of a exhibit that I put together in 2020 called Tourmaline Turns 200. It was the celebration for the bicentennial of the state of Maine, but it was also, we at the museum were celebrating the 200-year anniversary for the first discovery of gem tourmaline in North America, which took place in Paris, Maine in 1820. So we did an interesting little exhibit that just showcased some really nice tourmalines from many of the different quarries found here in Maine and had some different topics. I tell you to come and look at the exhibit, but actually it just came down this past week after a good 3-year run. And in its place in the next week or so, we'll be installing, we just started doing it today, an exhibit on lithium, lithium resources, how lithium is used in different materials and where it's sourced from and so on. So you missed Tourmaline Turns 200, but I really encourage you to come out and see the lithium exhibit, which, like Tourmaline Turns 200, is a free exhibit in the museum. So anyway, without further ado, let's get into it here. Tonight, we're going to cover quite a few different topics here all around tourmaline, but in a build-up to tourmaline. And first, we need to talk about the rocks that they come from, because tourmaline, at least the gem variety of tourmaline, is really not found in many different rock types. It actually only exists in one type of rock, hard rock deposit called a pegmatite, or a granitic pegmatite, as you'll see. And that's a type of igneous rock that crystallized from a magma. So throughout Maine, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of these pegmatites, but really only a small proportion contain tourmaline, and even fewer contain gem varieties of tourmaline, or gem species, excuse me, of tourmaline. As we'll see, there's different species of tourmaline. Some of the deposits have open cavities, or what we call pockets. These pegmatites, some of them have this, and so it's a void in a solid rock, and sometimes it's within these pockets, these cavities, that you find gem crystals of, among other things, tourmaline. At least you can be hopeful that you might find that. In the middle of the lecture, I'll actually show you what it's like to extract tourmaline crystal from one of these myrolitic cavities, these pockets, these voids. And then towards the end of the lecture, I'll show you how tourmaline is actually used in the lapidary arts through some videos, that process. So let's stay tuned here. So in order to understand what pegmatite is, we first probably should talk about granite. And that's a word that most people should be familiar with. It's a rock type that was quarried extensively here in Maine, particularly in the Deer Isle and MDI region. So we're all kind of familiar with that term. So start with what we know. And for the next few slides, we're just going to do some more general geology concepts, so some introductory geology concepts. And as it's really after or maybe during some folks' dinner, I find it's best to stick with some food analogies to help get my point across. So again, in a build-up to what tourmaline is, we need to understand what the rock type is. And we're starting with what is a rock in general. So this is a little simple crash course that I usually give to middle school students or younger to kind of illustrate what a rock is. But I find it works really well for adults, even better for some adults that are hungry. So at first, it might not seem like rocks have much in common with salad, but if you just stick with me here, a salad, as we see here, is an assemblage of individual vegetables. So in this salad, there are 4 different types of vegetables. And on their own, they're vegetables, right? But when you combine them together, you make a salad. All right, now let's try that with a rock here. So here's a piece of granite actually from Deer Isle, Maine. And you see there's different colors in this rock right off, and that's usually a good indicator you're looking at different minerals, right? Different colors represent different minerals in the rock. And so we have this piece of granite from Deer Isle, and like any rock, you have a combination of minerals that make up that rock. And so let's see. We have 2 different types of feldspar, one that's pinkish, one that is white. The pink one being a potassium-rich microcline feldspar, and the albite-rich, sodium-rich feldspar in the white. We have quartz, that kind of gray interstitial grains, and then there's some mica there to kind of round it all off. So for granite, what's most important are the feldspars and the quartz. You can have tourmalines in some granites, you can have muscovite mica, white mica, you can have black mica in this case. So, but it's really the feldspars and the quartz that are the essential mineral constituents for granite. And so here we have it, kind of going back to this salad concept. We have a bunch of different minerals. Individually, they are all separate from one another. They have different characteristics, different diagnostic properties. You can tell them from one another. But together, they make a rock, right? So that's my rocks or salad stick right there. I hope you enjoyed that. But I'd say that, before I go further, that granite's actually just one example of a rock, right? There are many different types of rocks. As you see when you drive along the road, you often see there's different types of metamorphic rocks, other types of igneous rocks too. So different rocks are made up of different assemblages of minerals. So let's now focus though on pegmatite. So pegmatite is a textural term, okay? And it's used to describe a very, very coarse-grained igneous rock. And again, an igneous rock is one that cooled and crystallized from a magma. And forgive me, I don't know how much background people have here, so I will go into some details. But if we can think of lava on the surface of Hawaii flowing off that red, hot, molten rock that cools and crystallizes and forms a dark rock in Hawaii, well, that same kind of lava on the surface can actually get trapped below the surface because it has to come from somewhere, right? It doesn't just come up from nowhere. So it's coming up out of the volcano from the subsurface. But even further at depth, if that hot molten material, which below the surface we call magma, not to confuse you more, but if that cools and crystallizes, you might form something like a granite or a gabbro, or in some cases, a pegmatite. Okay, so, but that's an igneous rock. So one that cools and crystallizes from a melt. But in pegmatites, the crystal sizes, the grain sizes can be on the meter to decimeter scale. They can be really, really large. And we commonly refer to pegmatites as granitic pegmatites given their composition. So that's back to the rocks or salad thing. So the reason I showed you granite is because it contains 2 different types of feldspar and quartz. And so, but the grains on the granite, I don't have a scale here, but there may be no more than a centimeter is the largest grain here that you see. But in pegmatites, like I said, the individual grains within there can be, in some cases, they can be like half the size of a football field. They can be just absolutely enormous crystals. Okay, so in Maine, we see these pegmatites. They're commonly just these white streaks that cross-cut metamorphic rocks or another type of igneous rock. Here's another example of one right here. But again, they have these large crystal grains inside of them, and that's, again, the term pegmatite, really coarse grain rock. In some cases around the world, none of these have been found in Maine, but they can get to be about a mile in width, thickness right there. So this one's maybe about 1.5 feet, but in some parts of like Western Australia, for example, they can be about a mile thick, which is pretty remarkable. What's cool about pegmatites is that they commonly host a range of rare mineral species that have value as mineral specimens, like as gem rough, as we'll see when we talk about tourmaline, the state mineral. But there's also quartz can be quite gemmy, and beryl. So you can have like amethyst quartz, for example, purple quartz, blue beryl, and that can also be cut into gem material. So there's some value in some of the material you find here. Additionally, some pegmatites host certain ore minerals, like lithium ore mineral, spodumene. And that's one of the most important mineral resources for lithium at this time, presently. And one particular potential resource is located here in Maine. But anyway, oh, and just another interesting thing. So we're talking about the state mineral. Well, the state rock is now also, as of 2023, officially pegmatite, granitic pegmatite, which is interesting. So this next slide is kind of just simply to show you how large some of the minerals and pegmatites can get. And so we have this image has been enhanced in blue to show these blue beryl crystals. Aquamarine is the gem variety of beryl that is kind of blue and green. And so, but here's a view from at the Bumpus Quarry, that's located about 15 minutes south from where the museum is located today. At the time, some of these, there were several finds of these crystals over a period of about 30 years, where they were mining for feldspar in particular. And that's why most of the pegmatite quarries in Western Maine were ever developed, is the feldspar, actually a rather drab mineral. It was used for porcelain products. But they uncovered on several occasions some large beryl, and the largest being around, like, it was around 33 feet in length or something like that, 30 to 33 feet in length. And at one side, it would be about six feet in diameter, and the longest. So at the time, they were the world record for this type of crystal. They were the longest crystals ever discovered, beryl crystals that had ever been discovered. So it kind of put Maine on the map internationally for a moment in that spotlight. And beryl is an important mineral resource for beryllium. And beryllium is a particularly light element like lithium that's used in a variety of applications, including nuclear. And that was the reason why it was recovered mostly here. So it's commonly found in Maine, probably more common than some of the tourmaline species that we'll talk about, as you'll see it in blues and greens, and sometimes colorless and yellow varieties. Oh, here we are. Oh, yes. And so if you were to visit the museum, actually, you'd be able to see a section from one of the crystals from one of the finds within that 30 to 40-year window when they were quarrying it. And so it's on loan from the American Museum of Natural History. They actually have a larger specimen that's now on display in their galleries, but it's sitting outside of the museum undercover. So if you ever do visit, you get to see what a piece of that beryl looks like. So where are pegmatites located here in Maine? Like I said earlier, there are thousands of these pegmatites located throughout the state. You'd find them if you were to walk around on some of the rocks, coastal outcrops of Deer Isle, MDI. You find them all through mid-coastal Maine and some parts of the interior of the state. So they are fairly ubiquitous here. But though there are thousands or even hundreds of thousands, as I said, located throughout the state, there's really this belt of pegmatite deposits extending from Saginaw County down near Georgetown, Topsom area, up into Oxford County, and then up in Newry. You can even find some out in You even find some up in Franklin County, next south of Rangeley there. So it's these, but it's these pegmatites here that, and that's why I have them kind of plotted on the map right here. They've been historically, they've been mined for feldspar, and later in later years, with feldspar mills in Maine closed in the 60s, and so they have been later reworked because they found a number of things like gem tourmaline as well as beryl. And large beryl crystals and things like that. So people have gone back into a lot of these old historic quarries and began reworking them to uncover some crystals that sometimes have some value there. The most well-known gem tourmaline localities exist in Oxford County, particularly in the town of Paris, Maine, and also in Newry. And then also in Androscoggin County at the Havey Quarry and Mount Appetite quarries in Auburn and Poland. And I should note that there are actually very few that are active today. Actually, you could count them really on one hand, the quarries that are run seasonally for the most part, because these are open pit mines, most of them. Although there are a couple of quarries that actually do go underground where mining can continue into the winter months as well. But that's not a very common thing with the pegmatites here in Maine. It's mostly due to the expense and the permitting. But you see, oftentimes, like I said, pegmatites, they're kind of cross-cutting a lot of the metamorphic, or the regional bedrock that you see in the area. And so there are these white streaks that you see across here in Reed State Park. Here's a shot from a quarry, the Havey Quarry in Poland, Maine. We'll see some more pictures from there. But so the quarry, it's an open pit style. There's one large feldspar crystal sitting right behind my colleague, Skip Simmons, there for scale. And so that's, again, just to give you a sense, these quarries have really, really large crystals in them. And then here are a couple of pockets. And this is a quarry that's actually being run, and it is being worked exclusively for the gem tourmaline that is found there. So the quarry owner on the right, Jeff Morrison, has been pretty successful at uncovering some tourmaline at this location. So anyway, let's keep going. So where are pegmatites located in Maine? Oh yeah, and can the bedrock geology predict where productive pegmatites may exist? So like I said, there's this interesting pattern that we see, this interesting regional pattern where we see a lot of the productive, or at least historically, the productive feldspar quarries, and then the gem locations in southwestern Maine, and they're all clustered down here. That's not to say that there aren't pegmatites existing at depth further to the northeast. It's just that we don't see them at the surface right now. And if we look on the right, this little interesting map, it's it's kind of like a hot cold map. It's showing two things. Apart from the black lines, which are faults, you can just ignore those. But all of the gray are large igneous rocks where you would find granite or granodiorite or gabbro or some type of igneous rock that's large. They're kind of amorphous shape. And then the yellows and then the reds and the oranges, those are all metamorphic rocks. Okay. And so Maine is mostly comprised of metamorphic rocks. There's not many sedimentary rocks like you'd see out in the southwest in Maine. They've been eroded away through successive glacial events. And so, but what you see right away when you look at this, you don't need to know a lot about the geology to see that there's this interesting thing going on. There's a lot of red down here in the southwest, and it gets progressively lighter yellow as we move to the northeast. So what that means is the rocks that are red the metamorphic rocks that are in red have endured high temperatures and high pressures during the most recent mountain building event. So they've been squished a lot, and they've been heated up in like a tectonic oven, if you will, and they exist right down here in the southwestern Maine. And hey, wow, that's exactly where a lot of these historically very productive pegmatite quarries, productive in terms of mining, I would say, and quarrying. But all of these gem tourmaline locations and things, they all exist in this area of high grade, what we call high grade regional metamorphic rocks. And so that's just an interesting correlation that I wanted to point out. And two, before I go any further, I just wanted to note of my slides, I put this little number in the bottom right-hand corner, and for each slide. So if you have a question about a specific slide, you can note it down. We can go back and find it later. So forgot to mention that earlier. But anyway, I just think it's interesting to point out that there are patterns that can develop. And here's another pattern before we go talking about specifically about tourmaline in Maine. So there's this cool pattern that exists between gem-bearing tourmaline pegmatites worldwide, okay? And so I'll just go through. So I've kind of pointed out these like locations for which gem tourmaline can be found. There are many other locations around the world, but San Diego County, California. Here's some of the tourmaline that you can find in Brazil from the Pedernera mine. Beautiful stuff. This is actually from Italy, from Elba, which is where, as we'll see, one of the gem varieties called Elbaite actually got its name from this location because it was first described from here, from the island of Elba in Italy. Let's see, from Malkhan and Russia, and as well as Pakistan right here. And so what I want to point out is that, so there's all of these different gem tourmaline locations located throughout the world. And again, there's many more than I pointed out here. But one thing that they all have in common is that they all are found in areas where there was a tectonic event. So there was a mountain building event that happened there, just like in the Appalachian Mountains here in the US. That's not to say in every mountain belt you're going to find tourmaline everywhere you go, but my point is that when you're finding gem tourmaline, you happen to also be in a mountain building event. So that's an interesting pattern that is also something that you might consider. And someone who's like a prospector uses patterns like this to try to find locations beyond tourmaline, copper deposits, lead zinc deposits, gold deposits, etc. Those things can all be found patterns based on the tectonics. So a little bit of science for you for this evening. So some interesting stuff. Okay. Let's see. So on to 11. So we're going to move now in. We're going to switch gears and talk a little bit more about some of the minerals that are found specifically in Maine's pegmatites, and then get really into the tourmaline. So we'll get there eventually. I know I'm kind of putting it off. So in some pegmatites, interestingly, in some pegmatites found in Maine, they can host more than 100 different mineral species in one deposit. And actually, my colleague that I work with, Alexander Falster at the museum, from one pegmatite that he's been going to weekly for almost 8 years now, every Sunday, he's identified over 200 individual mineral species from a single pegmatite he's gone to, and that's incredible. And so for context, though, for those of you who aren't really into the mineral world, most igneous, metamorphic, or even some sedimentary rocks really contain no more than 15 minerals. And actually, it's the same minerals generally over and over again. And it's really only like 7 in most instances. 15 is really high. So a single rock type, and I mean an area, no bigger than, in this case, the dike is probably only 30 to 40 feet, 50 feet thick at the most. So for an area from just 50 feet across, 200 different mineral species is truly incredible. It just takes a lot of time and effort to collect those and then identify what those minerals are. But that's just for perspective. So pegmatites are really interesting mineral deposits. They're kind of like mineral factories is kind of one of the ways that I like to look at them. The reason many of the pegmatites here in Maine were not really exploited for the variability of the mineral species, actually a lot of that's really fully being understood in modern times here. It was really for this mineral right here, feldspar. That was the reason why they were quarrying. And again, that mineral could be crushed up and put into some porcelain products used in the glazes. It's also used as an abrasive, among other things. But you can find, again, biotite, but also muscovite mica, biotite being the black mica, muscovite being this kind of silvery type. And garnet is a common one here. And this one actually has a little rim of tourmaline on it, which is an interesting reaction you see in some pegmatites here in Maine. So, but, those are kind of the drab minerals. Garnet can be kind of pretty sometimes, but the Maine's pegmatites are really well known for some of these others. So fluorapatite, a really deliciously purple looking phosphate mineral here. One of the most famous fluorapatites was actually discovered at the Pulsifer Quarry. It's on display at the Smithsonian if you were to go down in DC and see that. So one of the best examples of fluorapatite ever discovered in the world. It's called the Roebling apatite. And it's pretty much baseball size. It's a big old crystal. And so, but like I said earlier, in some pegmatites, you find there's lots of different types of quartz, or varieties of quartz, I should say. One that's more famous here in Maine is found in the town of Stowe, is amethyst right here, so the purple variety of quartz. Topaz is not particularly common in Maine pegmatites, though there have been some very, very large crystals, like soccer ball size, that have been recovered, and they have a light blue color. And that would be at Lord Hill. This actual crystal right here is probably about 1.5 inches tall, and that was from the Fisher Quarry in Topsom. Beryl is something you often find. Like I said, here's a nice pocket crystal, this blue aquamarine right here from Topsom. And then this really pretty pink one called morganite. It's actually been etched slightly. So it was a larger crystal that during the final stages of this rock forming, it got eaten up. And so it has this interesting kind of pattern here. It's kind of sculptural. Okay, so, so those are some really fantastic minerals, and there are plenty more that are found in Maine pegmatites on various scales too. They, some of the very micro specimens are quite beautiful as well. But when it comes to pegmatite minerals in Maine, none is more sought after than the state mineral, which is tourmaline. So like I had said earlier, the first discovery of gem tourmaline in North America was made at this point over 200 years ago in 1820 in the town of Paris, and that would become the quarry known as the Mount Mica Quarry, which is still active today. That's one of the few, like I said, underground workings here, pegmatite quarries in the state. So, but since then, since 200 years ago, there have been numerous discoveries elsewhere in Maine that have yielded significant quantities of material over either through the lifetime of the quarry or at an individual discovery. So Maine is fairly famous internationally for its tourmaline that's been discovered here. And what you end up doing with a lot of it, you can sell the tourmaline as individual specimens, or if it is of gem quality, like this particular crystal you see here, has the transparency to it, has great color. You can actually cut a crystal like that to form a gem or a gemstone. So, but tourmaline is actually a whole group of minerals that includes over 30 different species. And this is all thanks to the mineral formula that you see right here. Okay. And there are various substitutions that can be made by certain elements in certain sites. So each letter here is really representing a different site in this crystal structure, because minerals are really just made up of a combination of elements. Okay, it's kind of like the DNA combination that makes these minerals. All right, so like all minerals, there's this chemical formula, and so with tourmaline, here is this kind of recipe of the essential elements for making for making this particular mineral. And that's what makes it unique from other minerals that are out there, right? So each mineral has its own specific chemistry, okay? And there is some variability, as you'd see. So, and that's what's kind of interesting about tourmaline, and it allows it to have so many different species, is that, so in one site, you can substitute 3 or no elements in that particular site, and with others. So these different combinations make these different species. So it's just kind of an interesting thing. So, but out of the 30 different species, there are at least 3 that are most commonly found here in Maine. So dravite, the first right here, is found in some more mafic metamorphic rocks that are associated with pegmatites, though not always. You don't always see that there. But it's also found in some volcanic rocks in coastal Maine in the Blue Hill area. And so what's important with this one is the presence of magnesium right here in the formula, okay? And then we have schorl, which is the most common tourmaline species that you find in Maine. Black tourmaline, schorl. So it's common, or it occurs in granitic pegmatites and even some granites and some metamorphic rocks in some instances. And when we're looking at the formula here, the important thing, the distinguishing thing here is the iron. Okay, you notice that there's some patterns with the formulas here. They all start with sodium. They all have aluminum here. In the next site, but it's this middle site right here, the Y site, that there's some variability. And so Elbaite tourmaline, again named after the island of Elba in Italy, that's the species of tourmaline here in Maine that's most sought after, and it's the only gem species that you find here in Maine. And the importance chemically here with this one is that it contains some lithium as well as some aluminum in this particular site. And I'll say that it's you don't, like I said, we don't see elbaite tourmaline in every pegmatite. There's very few that actually contain this. And that's because you have to have an abundance of lithium around in the melt to produce that type of tourmaline. So only certain species of tourmaline are found in certain types of rocks, okay? You have to have an abundance of lithium, in this case, to make the elbaite tourmaline, as well as other lithium minerals. Okay, so here's some examples of the tourmaline species found in Maine, both dravite right here and schorl on the right. They're very dark, they're brittle, so they really have no value except as mineral specimens. Schorl can be quite lustrous, and there are some really exceptional examples that have been found at the Nubble Quarry in western Maine here. Dravite is also found, like I said, in some of the volcanic rocks in Blue Hill, particularly those associated with some of the copper deposits you find there in Blue Hill. They're kind of these fibrous brown aggregates that are found in the rock there. But nonetheless, it's there. It's in a different environment too, which is kind of interesting. But like I said, elbaite is the only tourmaline species that's found in Maine that's of any kind of gem quality. Okay? Though there are other types of gem species that are out there, in Maine we find elbaite is the only one. So, and it also happens to be the most common gem tourmaline species that's found in the world as well. But like I said, there are others: rossmanite, lidocotite. There are several other species of tourmaline that do have gemmy properties. So it's commonly found here in Maine in red and green, and there's variations of those colors, but you might also find some blues as well as some colorless varieties here in the state. But well-formed gemmy crystals like this one on this side they occur in those pockets, those cavities that are found in some pegmatites. So note that it's really well-formed, has a nice termination, and these actually are striations along the sides, these lines right here. So this is a natural thing, a natural growth pattern that you see with these crystals. And so they form in these pockets, these cavities, these voids in solid rock. So I think it's worth spending a little bit of time talking about just giving you a basic overview of what pockets are, because they're actually a really interesting phenomenon that you see in many different rock types, not just pegmatites, but they're most common here in these types of rocks, okay? And they develop during the late stages of pegmatite as it's crystallizing. So it's a big batch of molten material that cools and crystallizes from the outside. And the leading idea to explain why these why these cavities form is that there's a certain proportion of water in this melt. So it's not just molten rock. There's actually some water that's dissolved in there. And these melts tend to contain a higher quantity than most of water. And so when you get to the final stages, what happens is the water actually separates from the molten rock and it creates this void. And that's where these crystals will grow into. And you can kind of think of that like oil and vinegar. You shake it up, and then you let it kind of settle out, and then everything kind of separates. So it's kind of similar here. So you have water and molten rock, and eventually they separate. And the bubbles, the water forms these bubbles that are these cavities, okay? And that's where these crystals can kind of grow unencumbered and inward. That's an interesting one of the dog. I always forget I put that one in there. So from a miner's perspective, though, pockets are extremely important because they have a potential to give a large return on their investment. So within a pocket, one can expect to maybe find gem quality minerals that could potentially be worth millions of dollars if cut and if in high enough quantity and the quality is really good. So, but I will say that not all pockets, whenever you find them, not all of them contain gem tourmaline. They contain other minerals. Most commonly, you'd find quartz crystals in these things. And so they range in size. Pockets do from nickel quarter size. They can be very large, like this one actually right here. There's a ladder going into it. This one is in Greenwood, Maine. It's called the Mother Mary Pocket. It was filled entirely with quartz. At its longest length, it was 90 feet long, and it did kind of an hourglass shaped thing where it got to be like 10 to 15 feet wide, then it would get down to 2 or 3 feet, and then it would open back up. But 90 feet long, a void in solid rock, it's just kind of a remarkable thing. And if you look up some of the chamber pegmatites in Ukraine, you'll see some other examples of just these massive cavities and solid rock hosting gem material. So not all pegmatites, like I said, contain these pockets, because when they were forming, they might not have contained a certain proportion of water, and it's also a factor of where they crystallize at depth. That also has some influence on these things. Let me keep moving here. You oftentimes see, in some instances, if you're in a pegmatite where there are gem tourmaline crystals, you'll sometimes see that there are other minerals, colorful minerals, oftentimes associated with pockets. So like here, there's this purple lepidolite mineral, a mica, that's purple colored. Sometimes the feldspar gets this nice yellowish orange color. And this can be an indicator for a miner who's looking for tourmaline in a pocket that, oh, I'm seeing lepidolite, I'm seeing this orange feldspar. Sometimes the quartz gets really, really dark smoky. Oh, wow, I must be coming up to a pocket. So there's certain associations with other minerals that can help identify where a pocket might be. So just kind of another interesting point. So sometimes in the pockets, though, this is just an interesting fact here, is sometimes the pockets are not always hospitable to minerals, including tourmaline crystals. So during the late stages, that liquid phase, it's not just water, I should add. I just kind of make a general statement, but there are, it can be kind of a caustic solution based on what is in there. It can be quite acidic and corrosive, and so it can actually partially dissolve some of these crystals. So the one on the right did not get etched. It has these nice flat crystal faces, natural crystal faces. The one on the left, this is not the same crystal, mind you. This one on the left may have looked like the one on the right, but it got etched out. And so you see on the top part, there are these triangular patterns. Along the prism face, there's these rectangular structures here. So pockets aren't always, like I said, they aren't always hospitable to tourmaline crystals. So the solution can eat them up. So let's go to the Havey quarry. So like I said, part way, we're going to see what it's like to actually discover a tourmaline crystal in a pocket through a series of photos that I have here. So the Havey quarry, before I begin, it's located in Poland, Maine. It's closed to the public, so it's private property. It is one of the few quarries in the state that's active and looking for gem material. You can, however, get access to the quarry by joining a local mineral club, like the Portland Club, I think the Penobscot Mineral Club. I think there's a Penobscot Mineral Club as well, Kennebec Valley Mineral Club. So there are other mineral clubs throughout the state that by joining, you can then get access when they do special field trips, which they always do an annual field trip to the Havey quarry. The owners, he likes to have people come down and see what's going on. It's a fun experience for you and your family to go down to the quarries. But just wanted to say that it is private property. So before we go any further, so let's go check out what it's like finding. So we're in the back end of one of these cavities right here. And so you'll often find that some of the feldspar in here has been eaten away, corroded, and it forms this white clay called kaolin. And you'll sometimes have to dig around in that to dig out some of the tourmaline crystals. And so here's one that's kind of lying in some of the kaolin. And again, we're in the back of the pocket right there. So see how this is kind of in the cave. They've broken up the pocket, they entered it, they've taken pieces away. And so we're looking at the back end, and there it is. And see, note that kaolin clay right there. So it's just a white clay that can easily be removed with water. And there is the mine owner, Jeff Morrison. He's looking pretty happy. That's a nice crystal. And here is a picture back in the front of it. It's been called the Pocket Fairy, which there's an interesting story behind that. Should be more mindful of time here. But but it's called the Pocket Fairy, named after Maine's most famed pegmatite miner, Frank Parham, who always had a knack for showing up. He was kind of one of these older gentlemen that all of the miners knew and would invite him down. Kind of an open door policy. Frank could come and go as he pleased, but he always seemed to have this knack of just showing up when someone, they wouldn't call him, he would just show up when they had discovered a pocket. So he got the nickname, the Pocket Fairy. And so this crystal was named after him. So this is the Pocket Fairy. And it's actually on display at the museum if you were to come. Okay, so let's just briefly kind of talk about color with tourmaline. So as we've seen with Maine tourmaline and some of the other tourmalines worldwide, they come in a variety of different colors, but what exactly causes that color, right? And with minerals in general, there are several possibilities. There are several factors that will cause color, and there might be some variations in the trace elements, the chemistry of that particular mineral. There could be structural defects. There could even be inclusions of other minerals that cause that color. So, for example, rose quartz has inclusions of tiny titanium oxide minerals that gives it that pink color. But the elements responsible for color in minerals are called chromophores, and so the color that you see, the colors that you see in tourmaline is primarily caused by the presence or the absence of specific chromophores in trace amounts. So in Maine, again, the most common colors are black, blue, green, and red. And so the black, blue, and the green are caused by decreasing, in that order, black, blue, and green, decreasing amounts of iron in the crystal structure. So the red and pink hues, though, are caused by the presence of manganese in the crystal structure and actually the absence of iron. You can't have any iron in there, otherwise it'll turn dark. So when you lose the iron and you have, manganese around, you might get some pink or some even sherry colored. So, but then subtle variations between the iron and the manganese will create a range of greens and reds that you see in the different crystals. Okay, so I'll do a special note about zoning right here. I don't know where that little squiggle turned up, but there is now a squiggle on my presentation. So, but I'll note that, so a special note about zoning, because this really comes down to, zoning, variations in chemistry. So in Maine, this term was coined here called watermelon tourmaline, where you have, and this one's from Mount Mica in Paris, you have this dark green rind, usually a little bit of a white inner rim, and then you have this red center. And so it looks obviously like the watermelon, the fruit that we're all very familiar with. And so the watermelon tourmaline, again, some of the tourmalines here in Maine came out looking like this. Somebody coined the term, but it's now internationally known. So if you find tourmaline from Brazil, Pakistan, etc., and it has this appearance, they'll call watermelon tourmaline. But what it comes down to is these crystals, and what we're looking at here too, and I think I'm still in video so people could see like my pen, is that in tourmaline crystals are elongated, right? So they're longer in one direction. And if we were to cut them perpendicular to this long axis, that's what you might find. So this crystal section has been cut perpendicular to the long axis, kind of like bread, and we're looking at the slice of bread, right? But remember what we said, absence of iron and the presence of manganese gives it the pink color. So when this crystal started growing first from the inside, because they grow from the inside out, they grow upwards and from the inside out, there was lots of manganese around and not much iron. So you get this pink crystal that formed. And then all of a sudden, something happened. Manganese is gone, or we started to get more iron in the system. And so then that rind of green formed around it. So there's your watermelon tourmaline. So kind of interesting. Gem materials have historically really been divided up into two groups, precious and semi-precious, though these terms are pretty much antiquated. They do kind of apply to some extent to the overall rarity of these gem materials, but the most well-known precious stones, precious gems, are the big four, called the big four: ruby and sapphire, both corundums; emerald, which is a type of beryl, not found in pegmatites though, and diamond. And none of these exist in Maine. Okay. All of Maine's gem materials fall under the semi-precious category. And so they don't only include tourmaline, but there's types of quartz. Amethyst in particular is most prized for the quartzes, more so than smoky or colorless or rose quartz. But there's also beryl and aquamarine, the yellow heliodor, and the pink morganite that we saw earlier. So those are different types of gem aquamarine, gem beryl varieties. There are over 30 different species of tourmaline that exist, okay? And that comes down to the chemistry, those different species. But there are different varietal names for the gem materials, just to confuse things even more, right? And so, for example, with tourmaline, the green tourmalines we can call verdolite, blue tourmalines we could call indicolite, red tourmalines rubellite, and colorless acrolite. So they can all be the same species. Elbaite tourmaline, for example, all of these tourmalines from Mount Marie are elbaite tourmalines. However, there are different gem varietal names. So the pink and even the sherry might be in the rubellite categories. And then the greens would be the verdolite and the indicolite being the blue. So that's just another kind of food for thought. And it's the same with quartz. Like I said, varietal names, quartz, amethyst, rose, smoky, etc. So, but before any mineral can become a gemstone, it actually has to be cut on a faceting machine. And this machine over here on the right, this is just an illustration here. It's simply really just a protractor with an arm attachment that holds the gemstone in place, and that what we call the doping arm, and that is set on a goniometer on an angle. And this doping arm will rotate; it'll spin around, and you take the stone that's on that doping arm and you set it down at a specific angle so that it presses up against a grinding wheel. It could be a slurry of grit, or it could be a grinding plate itself that rotates and spins around, and you turn that gemstone over and over at specific angles, and cutting. So you're cutting specific facets, and so that's what you're doing as you're pressing it into the grinding wheel. Is you're creating a series of flattened faces that we call facets. And they're given different names depending on where they're at. So you have the top ones, the table, crown facets. And then on the bottom, you have the pavilion facets, and then the culate, which is the point right there. And these all have to be set at a specific angle depending on what that material is, because the light, we're looking at on the left, this green gemstone is reflecting a lot of light back at us. And so we have the light will come down through the table and crown facets, and then it will hit the pavilion facets. And if they're cut at the right angle, the light comes in the gemstone, and then it will reflect off of that pavilion facet and back out through the table and crown. That's what gives a gemstone its kind of bling. And so I'm going to take you through the process of how these gems are cut. This is an example. We'll be using amethyst at the bottom. So it's kind of a rough piece that then is ground down and preformed. And then in this case, they start with the pavilion facets, flip it over, then do the crown and polish. So let's go through this process if my video works here a little bit. So yes, the next few slides, like I said, we're going to illustrate the gem cutting process with my colleague here, Ben, who is a gem cutter, faceter. In this case, like I said, we're using amethyst, but the same concept applies to any type of gem rough as being faceted. Hey, everybody, I'm so sorry. My computer just totally shut down on me, and I apologize. Right when we were getting to the good stuff. Okay, so anyway, one of the first things that Ben will do here is you note that he's looking for a window, an area where you're going to see there's like a large area that is very transparent. Maybe the color is really good, so a really desirable portion of this rough that he will then break apart and then set on the doping arm. Of course, there is some preforming, like I said, that kind of takes place. So he's going to go ahead and kind of grind this area to try to get it preformed and shaped to the the approximate shape that he wants for this gemstone. In this case, he's doing a round. All right, and then he will mount it to the doping arm. And so what he'll use here is it's a special type of wax that is brittle when cold, but it heats up and it really holds that gemstone well. And so you see he's melting the wax, and he'll flip it around here. I hope you can kind of see he's dopping the wax onto the arm. So the gemstone is then going to stay onto that dopping arm, and then it's going to set onto that goniometer there. Next. All right. And so then he is going to now set it up on the faceter arm there. Okay, see how he preformed that all by hand? So it's that kind of ovular shape. And now he's going to check the angles because, like I said, you have to have specific angles depending on what the gem material is for that reflection to work really well. Otherwise, your gemstone will be flat and the light will go right through it. You'll read a newspaper through it and it won't have that dazzling effect that you're looking for. And so he sets it, he sets the specific angle, and the plate gets moving here. It's spinning. In this case, the plate has diamonds impregnated on the surface. And so he'll set it down, and depending on what the design is, there's many designs that are already out there. You can already have the angles already set, so there's really no thinking to it. And then he'll just move it back and forth. And once he's ground one of the facets, he'll flip it at a specific rotation, 90 degrees, 20 degrees, 15 degrees. He'll move it until he gets all of those set. And then he'll flip it around and do the same thing with the pavilion facets. And so that's what he wound up with there for the pavilion facets. Okay. And in the end, let's move through because I'm also, again, trying to be mindful of time. Doing the crown facets. And he's doing the table right there where he's just, that's the largest window that you'd be looking down into. And so in the end, here is what he was able to produce. So this dazzling gemstone right there. And so all in all, almost 6 hours to complete this process. Okay, and again, you can do that with any type of gem material. So, but this is what, in particular, this is what tourmaline is used for, the gem elbaite species. So when you find that, some people will sell them as whole crystals, but oftentimes there's a larger market out there for gem material. So. Okay, and so I wanted to finish here with some examples of Maine tourmaline that's used in jewelry, and we'll start from oldest to youngest. So, as I mentioned way earlier, the Maine tourmaline was first discovered. Tourmaline was first discovered here in Maine 200 years ago, and the Mount Mica quarry in particular has produced this amazing tourmaline that was even fasted as far back as 150 years ago. And so this is probably one of the most famous pieces to come out of Maine. It's called the Hamlin necklace, named after, it was made for Augustus Hamlin, who in the 1800s, he was the son of the original discoverer of Mount Mica and the tourmaline there 200 years ago. And so this necklace, the Hamlin necklace, is mostly made of tourmaline. The larger center stones are tourmalines here. It's accented with some aquamarines that are kind of a pale color. And almost everything is from Mount Mica except this one red stone on the left. That's actually from Mount Rubellite in the neighboring town of Hebron. So this next one is a really truly Maine-based necklace here. So it was made in the 1900s. It's the Perry necklace. It's actually on display at the museum now on loan from the Maine State Museum. And you can come to see it. So the gold was collected from Swift River in Byron, Maine. The gem tourmaline here was discovered at Mount Apatite. And there isn't a lot of record of this necklace except who made it, which was a Portland-based jeweler at the time, and that the gold was recovered from the Swift River, but there was really no record on the gems other than it said it came from Maine, and but we've been able to identify based on the color and the era when this was made. This is most likely tourmaline from Mount Apatite in Auburn, Maine, and so that's an interesting thing that I want to emphasize, that certain tourmalines, certain locations will produce tourmalines with specific characteristics. Okay. And that would be the same like we looked at the watermelon tourmaline. Not every quarry that produces gem tourmaline produces watermelon tourmaline. So that can be a characteristic to help you distinguish where that particular tourmaline came from. So the same with this tourmaline here. And it was owned by Josephine Perry. It was a gift from her husband there, Admiral Robert E. Perry. And she's in this photo, she's wearing it right there. The largest single discovery of gem tourmaline that was ever found in North America, and this is a single discovery of tourmaline. There are other quarries out there that have produced much more in terms of volume over time. But largest single discovery was at the Dunton Quarry in 1972 in the town of Newry, Maine. And to celebrate this historic find, in 1976, this necklace, called the Maine State Necklace now, it was made entirely of Maine resources here. Again, Maine gold from various streams and rivers in the state. And actually, if you look carefully, these are actually gold nuggets that have been I don't want to say welded or soldered, but they've been fastened together here as the setting for these stones, which came from this large find of tourmaline in Newry in 1972 at the Dunton Quarry. This is a really nice necklace. It's really beautiful. It's on display, I believe, at the Blaine House at the moment. The State Museum is closed currently, where it is part of their collection there. So let's see. So those are some of the historic necklaces, but Maine jewelry, Maine tourmaline continues to be used in many different types of jewelry. So for example, here, there's at least 3 brooches, one called the Snowflake, with a trillium on the bottom right, and this interesting one called the Wavy Thistle on the top right. But it's all contains Maine tourmaline, and there's some aquamarine and other accent stones within there. So but beyond this, I mean, if you go to many of the jewelry stores across Maine, they use gem tourmaline from Maine in much of the material that they sell there. So it continues to be used. I alluded to some of this before, but some of the ways you can get out and learn about Maine geology. So we're wrapping up here. Maine geology, and if you wanted to get out into some of the quarries, I really recommend checking out some of the geology clubs. I can never say enough good things about the Maine Geological Survey and all the work that they do there. So if you're interested in learning more about Maine's geology, there's also an annual meeting that goes on. The New England Mineral Association hosts a meeting in Newry, where it's mineral enthusiasts from New England and beyond that kind of come together and convene in May to look at a lot of different minerals found here in the state. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I want to call your attention to, and like I said earlier, a new exhibit that will be up. Actually, we started putting together some of the panels today, and so it will be open to the public on the 5th of November. Beyond batteries and beyond, why lithium matters. So if you've not made it over to the museum, I encourage you to come over and visit. And so thank you. With that, I guess I can take some questions if there are any. So I mean, I would first, and I'll jawbone the MINDAT. So if you don't know about MINDAT would be the place that you would go to see what minerals potentially exist at a locality. And so my point to you, before you talk to Al, I would check out MINDAT. See, I don't know if he updates that or not. But I would definitely check in with him, because it is over 200 now at this point, and he has the list. Oh my gosh, Tom, I know. You planted, yeah, you're planted here. No, guilty. So yes, the Oxford County Mineral Club, Maine's longest standing mineral club organization. It's obviously here in Oxford County. They meet monthly at the museum, first Fridays of the month. And yeah, they would be another organization that if you joined you would get access to the Havey Quarry if they were running a field trip there.
Great.
Thank you, Tom. You want to first kind of learn about the quarry that you're in, right? And there are certain characteristics that would allow you to assume that you might encounter a pocket. And so, for example, you might see Clevelandite feldspar. So you might see certain minerals, Clevelandite feldspar. You might see lepidolite. You might see green tourmaline, elbaite tourmaline, turning green. And so these might be some indicators for that specific quarry. But if you go to another quarry, you might have to look at other characteristics. So there might be feldspars that are rotted out and you have lots of little cavities there. It might be that you see one large feldspar crystal and some tourmalines kind of moving, or not moving, excuse me, oriented inward in one direction. And so there's textural indicators as well. So textural, mineralogical, and also textural on a larger scale where you are in that pegmatite, because these things can oftentimes be mineralogically and texturally zoned. You tend to find pockets in the central portions of these things. So if you're at the edge, what we call the contact, you're not really likely, not that it can't happen, things, all kinds of things happen. Pegmatites break the rules all the time. So you can find pockets along the edges, but it's so unlikely. Don't waste your time there. Go towards the center. When you start to see larger crystals, maybe larger areas where there's quartz, and it might be more transparent, that might be another way. But you'll find that depending on the pegmatite you go to, there might be different characteristics for each one that might indicate a pocket. And there's always one that breaks the rules, right? No two are alike. So that's a good starter. Another one, if you want to learn more about this, there's a great book called Pegmatology that's out there that was written by my colleagues at the museum. They wrote this book, just recently did a revision, but they wrote this book about 15, 20 years ago, and it has much more information in there beyond Maine too. So a good resource for you to look into if you're really interested in getting out there. Well, I never know how to sign off on a Zoom other than to say, I appreciate you all coming out tonight. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope that if you do come to the museum, you have my contact information there. You can drop me a line, say that you're coming. It would be great to meet you. I look forward to seeing you on your next visit.